This entire world that we're living in is really the empire of lies. Without telling more lies every day, it would just collapse completely. So it should be no surprise to you. I know that it's no surprise to us at all that the war in Ukraine they're trying to sell the public has required nonstop lying. They've lied about the causes of the war. It's absolutely obvious that our leaders triggered this by trying to expand NATO into Ukraine and ignoring 20 years of warnings from Russia that this was unacceptable. But instead, they want you to believe that Putin just woke up one day and invaded Ukraine to be evil. It's all a lie. It's a joke. News outlets have actually lied about the actual events of the war. They've made up ridiculous fables like the ghost of Kyiv. They've turned President Zelensky into some kind of a superhero while covering up his real behavior, which included banning opposition parties and forcibly taking control of the entire media. They're accusing Russia of genocide when actually it's obvious that Russia has tried to avoid civilian casualties, and that's a major reason the war is taking longer than originally expected. Lara Logan is a TV and radio journalist and a longtime war correspondent. She worked with CBS News for 16 years. She covered warfare and rioting in Baghdad and Egypt and Afghanistan. In 2020, she got her own show on Fox Nation, but then Fox News ghosted her for justifiably comparing Tony Fauci with Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele. Last week, she was invited onto Real America's Voice, and she was asked about reports from the Daily Mail that the Russian army was running out of bullets. In response, Lara revealed the real truth, that the story was completely ridiculous, another lie, and that the war in Ukraine has arguably prompted more lies on a larger scale than any news event in recent history. It may have even caused more lies even than COVID. Well, on the Stu Peters Show, we live for finding the truth, for exposing corruption and revealing lies. So naturally, we were happy to have sat down with Lara Logan. We promised never to ghost her for being too blunt or politically incorrect and saying the truth. We sat down with her for nearly an hour earlier today. Here's some of what she said.
There are actual apartment buildings that are surrounded by the Ukrainian flag. I mean, everywhere you drive across LA, I can just tell you that that's what you call the theater of the absolute ridiculous. When in our lifetimes did anybody ever see the cheering that is going on here with any kind of war? I mean, that gets my BS meter just, going absolutely off the charts, because that's not how things normally happen. And what you have here is, whether you like Putin or don't like him, whether he's a good guy or he's a bad guy, Putin is not willing to be part of whatever, global governing structure is coming our way. He's one man who's standing between us and the people who want to see a new world order. And you don't have to dig very deep to find out that Ukraine has a very dark history, and it's directly involved in much of what has gone on in the United States. You talk about, all the lies. Well, Ukraine has been at the center of many of the biggest and most damaging lies. And it has an extraordinary role to play in all of this. And Vladimir Putin has been very calculating. He's been very careful. He's been, as you would expect from someone who has said for 15 years he would not tolerate NATO expansion, who has made it very clear that he is not part of whatever that they've got going on right now in the bioweapons labs that Hunter Biden's, partners and firms are connected to. He's the man standing between us and, this new world order. And they want to say that we're conspiracy theorists if we talk about it. But at the World Economic Forum, they can talk about it. At the UN, they can talk about it. They can institute a global corporate, tax. They can institute a global minimum wage, suggest that for a universal basic minimum wage. They can talk about a universal health passport, right? A digital one. But if anyone else talks about it, then we're conspiracy theorists and we're pushed to the fringes of alt-right lunacy. And I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of it. I don't care if those people who want to read the New York Times and read the Washington Post and believe the nonsense. I just, I don't have time for that anymore. I'm talking to the people who are listening and want to hear what's true and what's not true. What's to me is even worse, Stu? What they've ignored is what Zelensky has done since he's been in office. If you go to Donbass in the east of Ukraine, if you go to Odessa, if you go to Lugansk, you know what you'll find? Mass graves all across the east of Ukraine. And that is on Zelensky's watch. It's Zelensky and the Ukrainian military and paramilitaries who have put those people in the ground. When they voted to secede, when they showed that the people were at least a majority were in favor of, being independent and going with Russia, oh, that was not a narrative that the West was ever, we weren't going to tell that story. We were just going to ignore it. We're going to parrot out what Zelensky and the West wants us to say about Ukraine, and we're going to ignore the memorials to those killed. In Odessa, during one of the protests, right, people went into a public building and it was set on fire. Of course, nobody knows who. And guess what? As the people were coming out of the windows and coming out of wherever they could to avoid being burned alive, they were being bludgeoned to death and shot. Okay. And guess by whom? By the very people that we have been arming and equipping. Don't forget, with Ukraine impeachment, right? That whole thing was about, Trump withheld necessary aid for just, for a matter of, a few hours or for a moment. And our allies needed that so desperately. Our allies, who you don't have to look very far to find pictures of our allies holding up the NATO flag and their battalion flag and the swastika. So I just want to understand this. It's okay for the United States to arm, fund, support, and equip Nazis in the Ukraine, but it's not okay to vote for Donald Trump. That makes you an instant Nazi here, which is a death sentence in America. This is why John Solomon at Just the News was so heavily attacked, right? Because his reporting was absolutely spot on. He was 100% accurate, everything that he was saying. And what he was exposing is something much more nefarious than I think most people realize. You have the Open Society Foundation and all the related, organizations. They call them NGOs and charities, right? But there's nothing charitable about these people. They're as political as it comes. And they're extremely radical. They have a very nefarious agenda. They launder money through their 501(c)(3) status, sharing it all with each other. And even worse than that, they figured out a way to rob us blind. They use our tax dollars through USAID, and they distribute that in places like Ukraine and all over the world. And what you found in John Solomon's reporting is not only are they stealing from us and funding their agenda with our tax dollars, laundering money through the NGOs and the oligarchs, what they're also doing is running policy through the US embassies. Why do you think Maria Yovanovitch, the former ambassador, was so anti-Trump and so outraged that the people of America actually chose their own president instead of the one that was selected for them? Right? Hillary Clinton. Why do you think she didn't have an acceptance speech? Anything planned, right? Only an acceptance speech. She didn't have a concession speech planned because she was guaranteed, right? She was guaranteed that election. She barely bothered to campaign. And yet they were so certain that she was going to win because the fix was already in. They just didn't get away with it in 2016. It wasn't on the scale that happened in 2020. So what do you have? If you go back to John Solomon's reporting, which I would urge everybody to do, because on his website, he has a transparency feature, and you can look at the actual emails with people from the Open Society Foundation and the National Endowment for Democracy and all of these other groups. And you can see them arranging meetings, deciding, giving lists and names of who should be investigated for corruption and who shouldn't be. And by the way, isn't everybody just a little bit stunned that a place like Ukraine, which many Americans, let's face it, couldn't even point out on a map, is now suddenly the thing that we wake up with Ukraine on our lips and we sleep at night with Ukraine on our minds and in our dreams and in our prayers and everything else. Not to say that my heart doesn't break for the people of Ukraine, but what I don't want is I don't want to be led blindly into a war that comes right to our doors, to our families, to our children and our houses, because the people who are lying to you about Ukraine, the people who lied about Russia, people who've lied about COVID, they unleashed a bioweapon on the world that isn't finished killing people. And we don't talk about that because they want us to follow the next shiny little object. And COVID is falling apart in every direction. Hunter Biden is heading for indictment and nobody's talking about Durham. Right? We're not focused on the things that we should be focused on. And these people want us to focus on Ukraine because they play the emotional card. It's the same thing with gun control. Don't talk about anything else. Just talk about the children who died. Just talk about the trauma of the victims. Focus on the emotion. Where do you see that playbook, Stu? You see it everywhere with almost every single issue.
All the same people that lied to us about the election, the same people that lied to us about gun control.
Yep.
We've exposed the American Medical Association, who has a handbook that teaches doctors how to fund off interviewers that are asking real questions about COVID-19 or the virus or the vaccines or the protocols or the treatment. And the same people, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and the rest of these demonic state mockingbird media outlets are now in lockstep on this Russia and Putin bad narrative with guys like Hannity and Levin over at Fox. Why?
I don't know is the honest answer, right? I mean, I can only tell you what I believe in my gut. I haven't talked to Sean and I haven't talked to Mark Levin, so I don't know firsthand what it is that they're thinking. But I think they get, a lot of journalists get seduced by this victim narrative, the emotional narrative of, oh goodness, the people of Ukraine are suffering. Therefore, we have to, we cannot possibly show that we don't care about that. And I think that they just haven't done their homework. They haven't really figured out what it's all about, and they've bought into that narrative and they're going to push it. I could be wrong about that. I mean, I'm telling you, that's just a superficial analysis.
Yeah. I mean, is it that, or is it that the network is owned by the same people, the BlackRocks and the Vanguards and the investors like Soros and Pfizer? And that's why Hannity has to shill for the shots. And that's why they have to say that Putin is the enemy and that he's bad and that he's going to use, by the way, chemical weapons against the people of Ukraine. No. Prediction, Stu Peters show prediction. Ukraine is going to use weapons, chemical weapons against its own people at the direction of the U.S. State Department, and then we are ready to blame it on Vladimir Putin. We did this in Libya. We did this in Iraq. We did this in Syria when Obama drew the red line. It's going to happen, isn't it?
So I would agree 100% with that part of what you're saying. It's actually called projection. In information warfare terms, what you do is you project your actions or motivations or whatever it is onto your adversary in advance, so that when it happens, you've already set the stage, right? It's shaping the information environment. It's kind of like you project that there's going to be a blue wave in Texas, even though your candidate is against gods, against guns, and against, gas. And there's no way that the majority of Texans support somebody like that. And why are you projecting that? Because you are shaping the environment so that when you cheat and push someone through who should never have won, people believe it. You've set the stage, right? You've laid the groundwork, just like they did with Trump and the mail-in ballots. Oh, it'll look like Trump is winning. And then when the mail-in ballots are counted, Joe Biden's going to win. I mean, when Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, when he says by 2030, and this is a quote, we'll never have owned less and been happier. Not him, of course.
Right.
He'll never have owned more and been happier. But we're going to own less and less and less. And look at us. Look at what technology has done. We don't own our music anymore. If you don't have a debit card and money in your account, then you don't have access to your music, right? You don't have access to your television. You may have a television on the wall of your home, but you can't watch anything on it.
Right.
Because they have control over that. So now imagine it's like the Chinese social credit system, and you don't have access because
you haven't been vaccinated.
Yeah, you're not vaccinated. And you know what? If that's too much of a leap for you, just think about it this way. Look at all the people who went to the Capitol on January 6th who've had their bank accounts closed.
That's right.
By Chase Bank and others, right? I mean, and so whether you're unvaccinated or did you vote the wrong way, right? Did you vote for Trump, or did you, you can substitute, did you go to a parent-teacher meeting and complain about critical race theory?
That's right. So all of these doctors, by the way, that are being shut down and they're being threatened with arrest. Some doctors are currently in jail. You have Dr. Vladimir Zelensky, who they're going after, Zev Zelensky.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
All these people and over this disinformation, and they're labeling disinformation like there's going to be a war on disinformation, which leads me to kind of the question is, I think that the Russian disinformation thing is really going to intensify over and above what we saw with COVID or medical disinformation.
Yeah. It has to. It has to. See, the problem is this: a lie has no legs. That's what my mother used to say, right? And my grandmother before her said it. What does that mean? It means you have to keep telling more lies to prop it up. And what is happening, what we're seeing with Ukraine is the same old tactics aren't working, right? I mean, maybe people over at Fox News are intimidated. Maybe they're blinded. But look, nobody else is, right? You're not, and you're not the only one. And so when you see, imagine in the beginning of COVID, nobody really dared to touch that narrative, right? I mean, people knew it was a lie. I knew China had bioweapons only, biolabs that, bioweapons labs, they don't cure people. I mean, their own people die of, the most basic diseases, and they do nothing for them. China only builds bioweapons labs. That's what they do. And US intelligence monitors them from day one, and has, ever since we've had the ability to do so. So the idea that we didn't know what they were doing in Wuhan, that's a lie. I knew that literally on the first day. And although I reported it as much as I could, we were in a time where you didn't dare say certain things.